maid's daughter slipped a note with only 5 words to the billionaire. Then he realizes she just saved his life. On an ordinary evening in the heart of New York City, billionaire Michael Thompson was preparing for his annual foundation gala, a night meant to celebrate generosity and success. But just hours before stepping into the spotlight, something happened that would shake his world to its core. A 10-year-old girl, the daughter of his maid, slipped him a folded note. Her small hand was trembling, her eyes filled with fear. Inside, written in shaky letters, were 5 words that would change everything. Don't panic. It's a trap. What trap? Who was behind it? And why was a frightened child the only person who seemed to know the truth? This is the story of how a maid's daughter saved a billionaire's life, with nothing more than a folded note. A quiet hum of the air conditioner was all that broke the silence of the penthouse office. From his window, billionaire Michael Thompson watched the city lights twinkle to life, a sprawling galaxy of dreams and struggles. He had built an empire from the ground up, but a chilling note now rested in his hand, a stark reminder that shadows could stretch even to the highest towers. Michael Thompson was a man of routine. Every evening, at precisely 6 p.m., he would sit in his leather armchair, overlooking the city he had conquered, and sip a glass of chilled water. It was a moment of quiet reflection, a self-imposed ritual to mark the end of another day of battles fought and won in the boardroom. He was the grandson of General Mark Thompson, a man whose name was etched in the annals of military history, a hero of a bygone era. Michael had inherited his grandfather's sharp mind and unyielding determination, but not his penchant for the battlefield. Michael's wars were fought with numbers and contracts, his victories measured in stock points and market shares. Tonight, however, the familiar comfort of his routine was shattered. His housekeeper, a quiet woman named Susan, had just finished her duties for the day. As she was leaving, her 10-year-old daughter, a wisp of a girl with wide, fearful blue eyes and a cascade of blonde hair, had darted into the room. Before Michael could say a word, she had pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand. Her small fingers were cold, trembling. Then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone, leaving Michael with the cryptic note. He unfolded it. The words, scrawled in a child's unsteady hand, were a jolt to his very core. Don't panic. It's a trap. Michael stared at the note, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. A trap? What trap? He was a businessman, not a spy. His life was a predictable landscape of meetings, negotiations, and charity galas. He had rivals, of course, men who would gladly see him fail. But a trap? The word felt alien, a relic from his grandfather's world of espionage and covert operations, not his. He thought of the little girl, Emily. She was a shy child, always clinging to her mother's side, her eyes cast downward. He had always been kind to her, offering a warm smile or a piece of candy. Why would she write this? How could she possibly know something that his own high-priced security team had missed? A sudden, chilling thought pierced through his confusion. The annual Thompson Foundation Gala was tonight. It was the crown jewel of his philanthropic endeavors, a glittering affair attended by the city's elite. He was scheduled to give the keynote address in less than 2 hours. The gala was being held in a new wing of the city's art museum, a project he had personally funded. It was a public event, a celebration of his generosity. It was also the perfect place for a trap. He walked over to his desk and pressed a hidden button. A panel slid open, revealing a state-of-the-art security console. He reviewed the security protocols for the gala. Everything seemed to be in order. His head of security, a former Secret Service agent named David Chun, had assured him that the venue was secure. But the girl's note had planted a seed of doubt, a tiny, poisonous seed that was now sprouting into a thicket of fear. He trusted David. The man was a consummate professional, meticulous and thorough. But David saw the world in terms of threats and countermeasures, of bodyguards and metal detectors. He was trained to spot the obvious dangers, the overt attacks. A child's warning, on the other hand, hinted at something more insidious, something that couldn't be detected by a security sweep. It hinted at a betrayal from within. Michael's grandfather had always told him, the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming. The old general's words echoed in his mind, a ghostly premonition. He had spent his life building walls to protect his fortune, but what if the threat was already inside? He looked at the note again. Don't panic. The child's handwriting was a stark contrast to the gravity of her message. She was trying to reassure him, to give him a fighting chance. He had to honor her courage. He had to stay calm. He picked up the phone and dialed a private number, one that wasn't on any official record. It was a number he hadn't used in years, a relic from a past he had tried to leave behind. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. "It's been a long time, old friend," Michael said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hand. "I need your help." He didn't know who to trust, but he knew he couldn't walk into that gala alone. He needed eyes and ears that weren't on his payroll, someone who could see the things that his own security team might miss. He needed someone who understood the art of the unseen war, the war his grandfather had fought so bravely. As he spoke, he couldn't shake the image of the little girl's face from his mind. Her wide, terrified eyes, her trembling hand. She had risked everything to warn him. Now, it was up to him to find out why. The city lights outside his window seemed to mock him, their brilliance a stark contrast to the darkness that was closing in. He had built this city, in a way. He had poured his fortune into its foundations, its hospitals, its schools. He had given so much of himself to its people. And now, someone in this city wanted him dead. He thought of his own family. His younger brother, Robert, was a constant source of disappointment, a man who had squandered every opportunity Michael had given him. Robert was a gambler, a drunk, a man who resented Michael's success. Could he be behind this? It seemed too elaborate for Robert's usual brand of self-destruction. Then there was his sister, Eleanor. She was a different kind of problem. Eleanor was married to a man who was as ambitious as Michael, but without the scruples. He had always suspected that his brother-in-law saw him as an obstacle, a rival for the family's legacy. But to plot his murder? It seemed unthinkable. And yet, the note in his hand was a cold, hard fact. Someone had set a trap, and a 10-year-old girl was the only reason he wasn't walking into it blind. He ended the call and stood up, his resolve hardening. He would go to the gala. He would walk into the lion's den. But he wouldn't be the prey. He would be the hunter. And he would find out who was trying to kill him and why. His grandfather had taught him that the best defense was a good offense. Tonight, Michael Thompson was going on the offensive, and he would start with the one person who seemed to be on his side, the maid's daughter. He needed to find her, to talk to her, to understand what she knew. He called his head of security. "David," he said, his voice calm and authoritative, "I want you to find Susan, my housekeeper. I need to speak with her and her daughter immediately. It's a matter of utmost urgency." He didn't explain why. He couldn't. Not yet. First, he needed answers. And he had a feeling that the key to his survival was locked in the mind of a little girl with blonde hair and terrified blue eyes. The clock on his desk ticked ominously, each second a countdown to a fate he was now determined to rewrite. He smoothed out the child's note and placed it in his pocket, a talisman against the encroaching darkness. He was Michael Thompson, the grandson of a hero, and he would not go down without a fight. David Chun was a man who rarely showed surprise. His face, a mask of professional calm, had been honed by years of facing down threats, both seen and unseen. But Michael's call had sent a ripple through his composure. The request to find the housekeeper and her daughter, delivered with such quiet urgency, was a deviation from the meticulously planned script of the evening. It was an anomaly, and in David's world, anomalies were synonymous with danger. He didn't question the order. He simply acted. He dispatched 2 of his best men, plainclothes operatives who blended seamlessly into the city's fabric. Their task was simple: locate Susan and Emily, and do it discreetly. No sirens, no alarms, no anything that might tip off whoever might be watching. Meanwhile, Michael paced his office, the vast expanse of glass and steel suddenly feeling like a cage. He replayed the moment Emily had slipped him the note. The fear in her eyes was genuine. It wasn't the manufactured drama of a child's game. It was the raw, unfiltered terror of someone who had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. His mind raced through the possibilities. Who could have access to his life, his home, his schedule, in a way that would allow them to set such an intimate trap? The circle of trust he had built around himself was small, fortified by layers of security and loyalty oaths. Yet, the note suggested a breach, a serpent in his gilded garden. His private line buzzed, startling him. He snatched the phone. "Yes, I'm here," the gruff voice from earlier said. "Basement level. Service entrance. I'm on my way." Michael replied, a wave of relief washing over him. He took the private elevator, a silent steel capsule that descended deep into the skyscraper's belly. The man waiting for him was the antithesis of the polished world Michael inhabited. He was of average height and build, with a face that was easily forgettable, the kind you wouldn't look at twice in a crowd. His name was Jacob, and he had once been his grandfather's most trusted operative, a ghost who moved through the world unseen. After the general's death, Jacob had disappeared, melting back into the shadows from which he had come. "Jacob," Michael said, extending his hand. Jacob's grip was firm, his eyes sharp and assessing, missing nothing. "You look like your grandfather when he was worried," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What's the situation?" As they ascended back to the penthouse, Michael explained everything. The note, the gala, the gnawing suspicion that someone close to him was orchestrating his demise. Jacob listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Michael finished, Jacob walked to the window, his gaze sweeping over the cityscape. "A child's warning," Jacob mused, more to himself than to Michael. "The oldest trick in the book. No one ever suspects the child. They are invisible, their words dismissed as fantasy." He turned back to Michael. "This trap, it's not about brute force. It's about precision. They want to make it look like an accident, something that won't raise suspicion." Just then, David Chun entered the office. He gave Jacob a curious, professional glance before addressing Michael. "Sir, we've found them. Susan and her daughter are at a bus station downtown. They had tickets for a bus leaving the state in an hour." Michael's blood ran cold. They were running. Susan, his quiet, unassuming housekeeper, was trying to flee the city with her daughter. This was more serious than he could have imagined. "Get them here." Now, he commanded. "Use a discreet vehicle. No one sees them coming in or out." "And David," Jacob added, his voice soft but carrying an undeniable authority, "have your men check their luggage. Carefully. See if they're carrying anything they shouldn't be." David nodded, his professional respect for the unknown man evident. He understood the subtext. Were they fleeing, or were they being sent away? The wait was agonizing. Michael felt like a passenger in his own life, the events unfolding around him with a terrifying momentum. Jacob, in contrast, was a picture of calm. He moved about the office, examining the security features, the entry points, the lines of sight. He was like a predator mapping out its territory, his senses attuned to the slightest hint of danger. Finally, David returned. "They're here, sir, in a secure waiting room downstairs." "And their luggage?" Jacob asked. "Clean," David replied. "Just clothes and a few personal items." But the girl, Emily, she was clutching this. He held up a small, worn teddy bear. She wouldn't let it go. Jacob took the bear, his large hands surprisingly gentle. He examined it for a moment, his fingers probing its seams. Then, with a small, sharp twist, he opened a hidden compartment in the bear's back. Inside was a tiny electronic device, a listening bug, no bigger than a fingernail. The silence in the room was deafening. The implications of the discovery were staggering. Someone had not only been spying on Michael, but they had used a 10-year-old girl, an innocent child, as their unwitting pawn. They weren't just running, Jacob said, his voice grim. They were being tracked. Michael felt a surge of cold fury. This was no longer just about a business rivalry. This was about a level of cruelty and manipulation that he had never encountered before. To use a child in this way was monstrous. "I need to talk to her," Michael said, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and concern. Alone, he found Emily and her mother in a small, windowless room, huddled together on a couch. Susan's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Emily was a small, trembling figure, her arms wrapped tightly around her mother. Michael knelt in front of them, his voice gentle. "Emily," he said, "I'm not angry. I just need you to tell me what happened. You were very brave to give me that note. You did the right thing." The little girl looked at her mother, who gave a slight, hesitant nod. Emily's voice was a barely audible whisper. "He told me to," she said. "Who did, sweetheart?" Michael asked. "The man," she whispered, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "The man who came to our apartment. He said if I didn't give you the note, he would hurt my mommy." The cold fury in Michael's chest turned to ice. He had underestimated the depravity of his enemy. This wasn't just about killing him. It was about terrorizing innocent people to achieve their goal. "What did this man look like, Emily?" he asked, keeping his voice calm, trying not to frighten her further. "He was smiling," she said, a shiver running through her small body. But his eyes weren't. They were scary. The description, vague as it was, sent a chill down Michael's spine. It was a detail that a child would notice, the dissonance between a feigned smile and cold, predatory eyes. He knew he couldn't get any more from her. She was terrified, and he wouldn't push her. He turned to Susan. "Susan," he said, his voice full of a compassion she had never heard from him before. "I promise you, I will protect you and your daughter. You are safe here, but I need you to tell me everything. Who was this man?" Susan broke down then, her sobs racking her body. Through her tears, she told him a story that made his blood run cold. The man had approached her a week ago. He knew where she worked, where she lived, where Emily went to school. He had offered her money, a life-changing amount, to plant the listening device in his office. He had told her that Michael was a dangerous man, a criminal, and that she would be helping to bring him to justice. She had refused. But then he had shown her pictures. Pictures of Emily playing in the schoolyard, of Emily walking home, of Emily sleeping in her bed. The message was clear: do as you're told, or your daughter will pay the price. "He told me to give Emily the note today," she sobbed. "He said it was part of the plan. A way to make you feel safe. To make you think you had a secret ally." Michael finally understood. The note wasn't a warning, it was a misdirection. A piece of psychological warfare designed to make him feel a false sense of security, to make him lower his guard. The real trap was still waiting for him at the gala, and he was walking right into it. He looked at the little girl, her face buried in her mother's side. She had been a pawn in a deadly game, a game she couldn't possibly understand. And yet, in her own innocent way, she had saved him. Her fear, her trembling hand, the genuine terror in her eyes, that's what had alerted him that something was truly wrong. A professional operative would have delivered the note with a steady hand and a convincing performance. But a terrified child couldn't hide her emotions. Her fear had been the one thing the mastermind behind this plot hadn't counted on. He stood up, his mind clear, his purpose solidified. "Jacob," he said, speaking into his watch, "get them to the safe house. The one my grandfather used. No one knows about it. Keep them there until I say otherwise." He turned back to Susan. "You did the right thing by telling me," he said. "Now, let me do the right thing by protecting you." As he left the room, he could feel the weight of the evening pressing down on him. The gala was in less than an hour. He was walking into an ambush, but now, at least, he knew the lay of the land. He knew his enemy was ruthless, cunning, and hiding in plain sight. He also knew that he had an unexpected ally in a 10-year-old girl with blonde hair and a teddy bear. And for the first time that night, he allowed himself a small, grim smile. His grandfather had always said that courage came in all sizes. Tonight, he had seen the truth of that old adage with his own eyes. The game was afoot, and Michael Thompson was ready to play. The ride to the museum was a silent, tension-filled journey through the city's glittering veins. Michael sat in the back of his armored town car, the familiar luxury of the leather seats offering no comfort. Beside him, Jacob was a statue of calm, his eyes scanning the traffic, the pedestrians, the city's nightly rhythm, searching for anything out of place. The city Michael had always seen as a testament to his success now felt like a hunting ground, and he was the quarry. "They'll be watching for your reaction when you see them," Jacob said, his voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the quiet hum of the car. "The people behind this. They'll be at the gala. They'll want a front-row seat to see their plan unfold." "My family," Michael said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "It has to be one of them. No one else has the access, the knowledge, or the motive," Jacob finished for him. "Legacy, jealousy, greed. They're the oldest motives in the book." He looked at Michael, his gaze direct and unflinching. "Your grandfather used to say, you can't choose your family, but you can choose who you trust. Tonight, you trust no one but me and Chun." David Chun was already at the museum, coordinating his team. He had doubled the security detail, but with a quiet efficiency that wouldn't raise alarm. His men were ghosts, melting into the crowd of waiters, valets, and museum staff. They were looking for the face that didn't fit, the gesture that was out of place, the shadow in the corner of the room. As they pulled up to the grand entrance, a throng of photographers and reporters surged forward, their flashes like a sudden burst of lightning. Michael stepped out of the car, forcing a smile that felt brittle and foreign on his face. He was a man playing a part, the benevolent billionaire, the city's favorite son. But beneath the mask, his senses were on high alert, every nerve ending screaming with a primal instinct for survival. Jacob exited from the other side, a nondescript man in a well-tailored but unremarkable suit. He was Michael's business associate, a face no one would remember, which was precisely the point. While Michael drew the attention of the crowd, Jacob's eyes were already scanning the rooftops, the windows of the surrounding buildings, the faces in the crowd. The gala was in full swing. The new wing of the museum was a cavern of glass and marble, filled with the city's most powerful and influential people. Laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses echoed through the vast space, a symphony of blissful ignorance. To them, this was just another night of celebration. To Michael, it was a battlefield. He saw his sister, Eleanor, across the room, holding court with a circle of admirers. She was beautiful, elegant, and radiated an aura of effortless grace. Beside her stood her husband, Richard, his smile as polished as his expensive shoes. Richard was a man who had married into wealth and power, and he wore it like a second skin. He had always been too eager, too ambitious, his flattery always tinged with a hint of something Michael couldn't quite put his finger on. Resentment, perhaps. Then he saw his brother, Robert, lurking near the bar, a half-empty glass of scotch in his hand. Robert was the family's black sheep, a man who had drifted through life on a current of bad decisions and self-pity. He saw the world through a lens of bitterness, convinced that Michael had stolen the success that should have been his. As Michael moved through the room, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, he could feel their eyes on him. Eleanor's cool, appraising gaze. Richard's overly enthusiastic smile. Robert's sullen glare. Any one of them could be the architect of this nightmare. Jacob had melted into the crowd, a ghost at the feast. He moved with a practiced ease, his path seemingly random, yet always positioning him with a clear line of sight to Michael. He was a silent guardian, a shadow of protection in a room full of potential threats. Michael made his way to his sister. "Eleanor," he said, kissing her on the cheek. "You look stunning." "Michael, darling," she cooed, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't make it. Richard and I were just talking about your speech. We're all so proud of you." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he said, his gaze shifting to Richard. "Richard, good to see you." "Michael," Richard boomed, clapping him on the shoulder with a little too much force. "Big night. Big night. The city can't thank you enough for your generosity. You're a true pillar of the community." The words were honeyed, but Michael could taste the poison beneath. Richard had recently suffered a massive loss on a risky investment, a fact Michael knew from his private financial reports. He was a desperate man, and desperate men did desperate things. He excused himself and moved towards the bar, towards his brother. Robert didn't bother with the pretense of a smile. Well, he slurred, his words thick with alcohol and contempt. "Look who it is. The man of the hour. Come to bask in the glow of your own magnificence." "Robert," Michael said, his voice low and even. "Don't do this. Not tonight." "Oh, I wouldn't dream of spoiling your big party," Robert sneered. "After all, I'm just the embarrassing little brother, right? The failure. The one you have to bail out of trouble every other week." The raw, undiluted hatred in his brother's eyes was like a physical blow. Robert was drowning in debt, his life a chaotic mess of his own making. He blamed Michael for everything, for his own weaknesses, for his own lack of ambition. He was a man with nothing to lose, and that made him dangerous. As he turned away from his brother, a waiter approached him, offering a glass of champagne from a silver tray. Michael was about to take it when he saw a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of the head from Jacob, who was standing across the room, seemingly engrossed in a conversation. Michael understood immediately. "No, thank you," he said to the waiter. "I'll be giving a speech soon. I need a clear head." The waiter nodded and moved on, but Michael didn't miss the flicker of, what was it? Disappointment? Annoyance? It was gone in an instant, but he had seen it. He made a mental note of the man's face. He felt a buzz from his watch, a prearranged signal from Jacob. He made his way to a secluded alcove, where Jacob was waiting. "The waiter," Jacob said, his voice barely a whisper. "He's one of them. He tried to serve a drink to 3 other people before you. They all refused." He was getting anxious. "The drink is the delivery system." "Poison?" Michael asked, his stomach clenching. "Something more subtle," Jacob replied. "A fast-acting, non-lethal compound. Something that would induce a massive heart attack within minutes. It would look natural. A man your age, under the stress of a big speech. No one would question it. The autopsy would show a cardiac arrest. Case closed." The sheer, cold-blooded simplicity of the plan was horrifying. It was a clean, quiet murder, executed in a room full of witnesses, none of whom would see a thing. "We need to find out who he's working for," Michael said, his voice a low growl of controlled fury. "David's men are on him," Jacob assured him. "They'll follow him, see who he reports to. But you still have a part to play. You need to get up on that stage and give your speech. You need to act as if nothing is wrong. The mastermind behind this will be watching. They need to believe their plan is still in motion." The thought of standing in front of that crowd, of smiling and speaking of hope and philanthropy while knowing that someone in that room wanted him dead, was almost too much to bear. But he knew Jacob was right. He had to see this through. He had to draw the serpent out of its hole. He looked at his watch. It was almost time. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the performance of his life. He was no longer just a businessman. He was a soldier, just like his grandfather. And he was walking into the heart of the battle. "Let's go," he said to Jacob, his voice steady, his resolve like iron. "It's showtime." As he walked towards the stage, the applause of the crowd washing over him, he caught the eye of the little girl, Emily, in his mind's eye. Her courage, her simple act of bravery, had given him a fighting chance. He would not fail her. He would not let the monsters who had used her win. He would unmask them, and he would make them pay. The trap had been set, but the hunter was now the hunted. And the real game was just beginning. The stage lights were warm on Michael's face, a stark contrast to the icy dread that had settled in his bones. He stood at the podium, a sea of faces looking up at him, their expressions a mixture of admiration and expectation. He saw them all, the business leaders, the politicians, the artists, the socialites. And somewhere in that glittering crowd, a predator was watching, waiting for him to falter, to collapse, to die. He began to speak, his voice resonating through the grand hall, steady and strong. He spoke of the future, of the city's potential, of the importance of giving back. The words were familiar, a speech he had rehearsed a dozen times. But tonight, they felt hollow, a performance designed to mask the chaos raging within him. With every sentence, he was acutely aware of the danger that lurked just beneath the surface of this polished affair. His eyes swept the room, pausing for a fraction of a second on his family. Eleanor and Richard were seated at a prominent table near the front, the very picture of a supportive family. Richard was nodding along to his speech, a look of rapt attention on his face. Eleanor was smiling, a serene, almost maternal expression that made Michael's skin crawl. Was it all an act? Was this carefully constructed facade of familial pride a mask for a murderous plot? His gaze found Robert, still propping up the bar at the back of the room. His brother wasn't even pretending to listen. He was staring into his glass, his expression a toxic cocktail of resentment and self-loathing. Robert was a mess, a walking disaster, but was he a killer? Michael had always seen him as weak, but perhaps he had mistaken weakness for something far more sinister. As he spoke, he could feel Jacob's presence, a comforting weight in the periphery of his vision. Jacob was standing near the side exit, a statue of vigilance amidst the swirling currents of the gala. He wasn't watching Michael. He was watching the crowd, his eyes missing nothing. Out of the corner of his eye, Michael saw the waiter again. The man was moving through the room, his silver tray now empty. He was trying to be inconspicuous, but there was a coiled tension in his movements, a subtle urgency that betrayed his anxiety. David's men were shadowing him, their movements so fluid, so seamless, that even Michael, who knew they were there, could barely spot them. Michael's speech reached its crescendo. He spoke of his grandfather, of the legacy of service and honor he had inherited. "My grandfather fought for his country on the battlefields of a distant war," he said, his voice ringing with a conviction he didn't feel. "He taught me that the greatest battles are not fought with guns, but with courage, with integrity, and with a commitment to protecting those who cannot protect themselves." As he said those words, he thought of Emily, the small, frightened girl who had shown more courage than anyone in this room. He was fighting for her now, for the innocent life that had been so cruelly entangled in this web of deceit. He finished his speech to a thunderous applause. He smiled, waved, and stepped down from the stage, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The first part of the plan was complete. He had shown no fear, no suspicion. He had played his part. Now, it was time for the next act. He was immediately surrounded by well-wishers, a crushing wave of handshakes and congratulations. He navigated the crowd with a practiced ease, his mind a million miles away. He was waiting for a signal, a sign that the trap was about to be sprung. He saw the waiter again, this time near the entrance to the museum's private collections, an area that was off-limits to the gala guests. The man cast a nervous glance over his shoulder before slipping through a service door. One of David's men, dressed as a museum guard, followed him without a moment's hesitation. A few minutes later, Michael's watch vibrated. A simple, one-word message from Jacob, now. Michael excused himself, pleading the need for a moment of fresh air. He made his way to a secluded terrace, the cool night air a welcome relief from the stuffy heat of the gala. Jacob was waiting for him in the shadows. The waiter made a call, Jacob said, his voice low and urgent. To a burner phone. We traced the signal. It's coming from inside this building. Who did he call? Michael asked, his heart pounding. We don't know yet. The call was short, just 2 words. He knows. Michael's blood ran cold. The plan had been compromised. The mastermind knew that he was aware of the trap. The game had changed. They were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. Where's the waiter now? Michael asked. David's men have him. They're taking him to a secure location for a conversation. Jacob's tone left no doubt as to what that conversation would entail. But the real problem is the person he called. They're here, in this museum. And now they're desperate. A desperate enemy was a dangerous enemy. The carefully constructed plan had shattered, and in its place was a volatile, unpredictable chaos. The killer would have to improvise, to create a new plan on the fly. And that made them even more of a threat. What's our next move? Michael asked, his trust in Jacob absolute. We need to get you out of here, Jacob said. But we can't just walk out the front door. That's what they'll be expecting. We'll use the service tunnels. My men have already cleared a path. Just as he finished speaking, the fire alarm blared, a deafening, piercing shriek that cut through the night. Panic erupted in the gala hall. The guests, their faces masks of confusion and fear, began to surge towards the exits. It's a diversion, Jacob said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. They're creating a distraction to cover their escape. Or, he added, his eyes narrowing, to create an opportunity to get to you in the confusion. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging the museum into a terrifying darkness, broken only by the flashing of the emergency strobes. The screams of the guests grew louder, a wave of pure, primal fear. Jacob grabbed Michael's arm, his grip like steel. This way, he said, pulling him towards a dark corner of the terrace. And stay low. They moved through the darkness, a pair of shadows in a world gone mad. The chaos was their cover, a shield against the unseen enemy who was now hunting them in the dark. Michael could hear the thud of his own heart, a frantic drumbeat against the symphony of chaos. His grandfather had faced ambushes on foreign battlefields, surrounded by enemies he could see, enemies who wore a uniform. Michael was facing an enemy who wore the face of a friend, a family member, a trusted associate. An enemy who had smiled at him, shaken his hand, and wished him well, all while plotting his death. As they navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the museum's service tunnels, guided only by the faint glow of Jacob's phone, Michael knew one thing for certain. The night was far from over. And before it was, he would come face to face with the person who wanted him dead. The trap had been sprung, not on him, but on the killer. And the museum had just become a cage from which only one of them would walk out alive. The service tunnels were a disorienting maze of concrete and pipes, a hidden underworld beneath the museum's polished facade. The air was thick with the smell of dust and damp earth, a stark contrast to the perfumed air of the gala. The only sounds were their own ragged breaths and the distant, muffled screams of the panicked crowd above. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every drip of water from a leaky pipe a footstep in the darkness. They'll have the main exits covered, Jacob said, his voice a low, steady presence in the oppressive dark. But they won't expect us to go deeper. There's a sub-basement that connects to the old city storm drains. It's our best way out. Michael nodded, his eyes straining to adjust to the gloom. He was a man accustomed to being in control, to navigating the world from a position of power. Now, he was a fugitive in his own city, his life in the hands of a man he barely knew. Yet, he trusted Jacob implicitly. There was a quiet competence about him, a sense of purpose that had been forged in the crucible of real-world dangers, not the sanitized conflicts of the boardroom. They moved in silence for what felt like an eternity, their path illuminated by the single, narrow beam of Jacob's phone. Michael's mind was a whirlwind of suspicion and betrayal. He saw his sister's serene smile, his brother-in-law's effusive praise, his brother's raw hatred. Any one of them could be the face behind this nightmare. The thought was a dagger in his heart, a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical threat. Suddenly, Jacob stopped, pulling Michael back against the cold, damp wall. He held a finger to his lips, his head cocked, listening. Michael held his breath, straining to hear what Jacob had heard. And then he heard it, a faint, scraping sound, coming from somewhere ahead of them in the tunnel. It was the sound of a footstep, hesitant and furtive, but undeniably there. Someone was in the tunnels with them. Jacob extinguished the light on his phone, plunging them into an absolute, suffocating blackness. The scraping sound grew closer. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The confrontation he had been anticipating, the moment when the faceless enemy would finally reveal itself. He could feel Jacob shifting beside him, his body coiled like a spring, ready to strike. The air crackled with a silent, deadly tension. The footsteps stopped just a few feet from where they were hidden. Michael could hear the faint sound of breathing, the rustle of clothing. The unseen person was so close, he could have reached out and touched them. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Michael's mind raced. Who was it? Richard, his brother-in-law, his ambition curdled into a murderous rage? Robert, his brother, finally pushed over the edge by a lifetime of resentment? Or someone else entirely, a pawn in a larger game, a hired killer sent to finish the job? Then, a new sound broke the silence. The click of a hammer being pulled back on a gun. The sound was unnervingly loud in the confined space, a final, chilling note in the symphony of the night. Just as the unseen assailant was about to make their move, Jacob exploded into action. He moved with a speed and precision that was astonishing for a man his age. There was a blur of motion in the darkness, a grunt of surprise, a sickening thud as a body hit the concrete floor. Then, silence. Jacob switched his light back on. A man lay on the floor, unconscious, a gun lying a few inches from his outstretched hand. Michael didn't recognize him. He was dressed in a dark, tactical uniform, the kind worn by a professional security detail. But he wasn't one of David's men. Jacob quickly searched the man, his movements efficient and practiced. He found a wallet, a set of keys, and a small, encrypted radio. He's a professional, Jacob said, his voice grim. Hired muscle. He's not our mastermind. He pressed the transmit button on the radio. A voice crackled to life, distorted and cold. Report. Is it done? Jacob didn't answer. He crushed the radio under his heel, the sound of splintering plastic echoing through the tunnel. They're getting desperate, he said, looking at Michael. They sent a cleaner to finish the job. That means they're losing control. And that makes them even more dangerous. They left the unconscious man in the darkness and continued on their way, the sense of urgency now more palpable than ever. They were no longer just evading a threat. They were actively being hunted. They finally reached the sub-basement, a vast, cavernous space filled with the forgotten relics of the museum's past. Dust-covered crates and sheet-draped statues stood like silent sentinels in the gloom. In the far corner of the room, a large, iron grate was set into the floor. The storm drain, Jacob said, prying the grate open with a crowbar he had retrieved from a nearby toolkit. It will take us a few blocks away, to a place where David's men can pick us up. As Michael was about to climb down, his phone buzzed. It was a text from David. We have the waiter. He's talking. The poison was supplied by a shell corporation. We're tracing the ownership now. But there's something else. The fire alarm. It wasn't just a diversion. It was a trigger. A trigger for what? Michael texted back. The reply came a few seconds later, and the words made his blood run cold. For the C4. What's C4? Michael typed, his hands trembling. There are explosives planted in the foundation of the new wing. The wing you're in. The whole place is rigged to blow. The fire alarm was supposed to be the trigger, but it seems to have malfunctioned. But he said there's a secondary trigger, a remote detonator. And the person with the detonator is still inside the museum. Michael looked at Jacob, his face pale in the faint glow of the phone. It's not just about me, he said, his voice a horrified whisper. They're trying to bring the whole building down. The sheer, monstrous scale of the plan was almost incomprehensible. This wasn't just a targeted assassination, it was an act of mass murder. The hundreds of guests, the staff, the emergency responders, they were all just collateral damage in a game so twisted, so evil, that Michael could barely wrap his mind around it. Who? He breathed, the question hanging in the air like a death sentence. Who would do this? Just then, David's next text came through. It was a single name. A name that shattered Michael's world into a million pieces. A name that made a mockery of everything he had ever believed about family, about loyalty, about love. The name was Richard, his brother-in-law. And with that name came a final, chilling piece of information. He's not alone. He's with Eleanor. And they have the detonator. Michael stared at the phone, the words blurring through a haze of disbelief and horror. His sister, his own sister, was trying to kill him, was willing to sacrifice hundreds of innocent lives to do it. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, that it felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. The game had changed once again. This was no longer just about survival. It was about stopping a massacre. He looked at the open grate, the path to safety. Then he looked back at the dark, cavernous museum, a tomb waiting to be sealed. He couldn't run. He couldn't leave those people to die. We have to go back, he said to Jacob, his voice filled with a steely resolve that he hadn't known he possessed. We have to stop them. Jacob looked at him, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Then, a slow, grim smile spread across his face. Your grandfather would have been proud, he said. Let's go hunt some monsters. They turned their backs on the escape route and headed back into the heart of the dying museum. 2 men against an army. Their only weapon the courage of their convictions and the knowledge that they were the last line of defense between hundreds of innocent people and a fiery grave. The final act was about to begin. Returning to the museum was like swimming against a tidal wave of human fear. The service tunnels that had been their escape route now became their path back into the heart of the danger. The distant screams and the blaring alarm were a constant, disorienting roar, a soundtrack to the unfolding nightmare. Michael's mind, usually a fortress of logic and calculation, was now a maelstrom of raw emotion. The betrayal of his own sister was a wound so deep, so personal, that it eclipsed the physical danger they were facing. They'll be heading for the roof, Jacob said, his voice cutting through the chaos. It's the only viable extraction point. A helicopter will be waiting for them. He paused, his hand on Michael's shoulder, forcing him to meet his gaze. You need to be prepared for what you're about to see. They won't listen to reason. They've crossed a line from which there is no return. Michael nodded, his jaw tight. He understood. The sister he had grown up with, the woman he had protected and provided for, was gone. In her place was a monster, a stranger with his sister's face. They emerged from the service tunnels into the main hall, a scene of utter pandemonium. Shards of glass from shattered champagne flutes littered the marble floor. Overturned tables and discarded shoes were scattered like the debris of a shipwreck. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke from a small, contained fire that the sprinklers were now dousing, adding to the chaos by sending arcs of water across the room. The remaining guests were being herded towards the exits by the museum's security staff and David's men, their elegant evening attire now disheveled, their faces etched with panic. Amidst the chaos, Michael saw a clear path to the grand staircase, the most direct route to the upper floors and the roof. As they started to move, David's voice crackled in Jacob's earpiece, which he had now shared with Michael. We have a visual. They're on the 3rd floor, in the antiquities wing. They're not heading for the roof. They're heading for the vault. The museum's vault was a state-of-the-art facility, designed to protect priceless artifacts from theft, fire, and even a direct bomb blast. It was a fortress within a fortress. Why the vault? Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper. It's the perfect bunker, Jacob replied, his mind quickly piecing together the puzzle. They can detonate the explosives from there and ride out the blast. When the dust settles, they'll be the sole survivors, free to walk away with whatever they've stored inside. It was a plan of breathtaking audacity and chilling cruelty. They weren't just trying to kill him. They were planning to erase him, his legacy, and anyone associated with him, all while ensuring their own survival. They took the stairs two at a time, their movements a stark contrast to the slow, panicked shuffle of the crowd. They were two men moving against the current, their purpose clear and unwavering. The Antiquities wing was eerily quiet, the alarms and screams of the crowd below now a distant, muted roar. The priceless artifacts of ancient civilizations stood in their glass cases, silent witnesses to a modern act of barbarism. And at the far end of the hall, the massive, circular steel door of the vault stood ajar. As they approached, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Richard, his face a mask of triumphant rage. He was holding a small, black device in his hand, the detonator. "Michael," he said, his voice dripping with a venomous satisfaction. "So glad you could make it. I was hoping you'd be here to see this." The grand finale of the Thompson legacy. Behind him, Eleanor emerged from the vault. Her beautiful face was twisted into an expression of cold, reptilian fury. She looked at Michael not as a brother, but as an obstacle, an inconvenience that was about to be removed. "It didn't have to be this way, Michael," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "If you had just been more generous. If you had just given Richard what he deserved." "What he deserved?" Michael repeated, his voice incredulous. "I gave him a position in my company, a generous salary, a life of luxury he could only have dreamed of. What more could he have wanted? He wanted respect." Eleanor shrieked, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking. "He wanted to be your equal, not your charity case. You always looked down on him, on us. You with your perfect life, your perfect reputation, your perfect grandfather's legacy. And this is your solution?" Michael shot back, his own anger rising to meet hers. "To murder hundreds of innocent people? To destroy the very legacy you claim to covet?" Richard laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the silent hall. "Legacy? This isn't about legacy, Michael. It's about a reset, a fresh start. When this building comes down, all of my debts, all of my failures, they'll be buried in the rubble. And with you gone, the Thompson fortune will be ours. A new legacy, built on the ashes of the old." He held up the detonator. "It's over, Michael. You've lost." As he spoke, Jacob, who had been silently moving along the side of the hall, using the display cases as cover, made his move. He lunged at Richard, a blur of motion in the dimly lit hall. But Eleanor had been watching. She pulled a small pistol from her evening bag and fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Jacob cried out and stumbled, clutching his shoulder. He was down, but not out. Richard, momentarily stunned, recovered quickly. He raised the detonator, his thumb hovering over the button. "No more games," he snarled. But in that split second, Michael acted. He grabbed a heavy bronze statue from a nearby pedestal, a bust of a Roman emperor, and hurled it at Richard with all his might. The statue struck Richard in the chest, sending him staggering backward, the detonator flying from his hand. The small black device skittered across the polished marble floor, coming to a rest just a few feet from the open vault door. Eleanor fired again, but her shot went wide as Michael dived for cover behind a large sarcophagus. The final, desperate endgame had begun. It was a chaotic, deadly dance in a room full of sleeping history, a battle for the future surrounded by the ghosts of the past. Michael knew that only one side would be walking out of this room, and he would do whatever it took to make sure it wasn't his sister and her husband. The silence after the gunshot was a hollow, ringing void. Crouched behind the ancient sarcophagus, Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. He risked a glance. Eleanor stood frozen, the pistol in her hand looking like a grotesque toy. Richard scrambled for the detonator, his face a mask of desperate greed, while Jacob struggled on the floor, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. Michael knew he had to force the endgame. He pushed the heavy lid of the sarcophagus. With a deafening groan, the massive stone slab crashed to the floor, shattering. The diversion worked. Eleanor flinched, and in that instant, Michael charged, not at his sister, but at Richard, tackling him just as he reached the detonator. The two men crashed to the floor in a tangle of fury. Richard was surprisingly strong, fueled by a cornered animal rage, but Michael fought with a cold, controlled instinct. He twisted, using Richard's momentum against him, and slammed his brother-in-law's head against the hard marble floor. Richard went limp. Michael snatched the detonator. He had it. "It's over, Eleanor," he gasped, getting to his feet. He turned to face his sister, the detonator held tightly in his fist. There's nowhere left to run. For the first time, raw panic showed on Eleanor's face. She raised the gun, her hand trembling. "Don't come any closer, Michael," she pleaded. "Or what?" he challenged, stepping towards her. "You'll shoot your own brother? Is the money really worth becoming this?" "You don't understand," she sobbed, tears carving paths through the grime on her cheeks. "Richard," he said, "this was the only way. The only way to prove myself, to build something of our own." The confession, so pathetic and weak, was a final, devastating blow. This entire nightmare was born from her insecurity and her husband's manipulative greed. "So you chose him," Michael said, his voice heavy with a sorrow that was almost suffocating. "You chose him over everyone." Suddenly, Richard, who had been feigning unconsciousness, lunged. He tore the gun from Eleanor's hand and pointed it at Michael. But instead of aiming at his rival, he moved to stand behind the wounded Jacob, pressing the gun to his head. "She loves me," Richard snarled, his eyes wild with a crazed light. "Now, give me the detonator, Michael, or the old man dies." Michael looked at Jacob, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't do it." But Michael couldn't let another person die for him. "All right, Richard," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "You win." He held out the detonator. As Richard's eyes lit up with greed and he stepped forward, Michael did the last thing he expected. He didn't toss the device. He clicked a button on the side. A small, red light began to blink. "It's armed," Michael said, his voice as cold as ice. "But the remote is disabled. The only way to set it off now is to press this button. And if I do, we all die together." Richard froze. "You're bluffing," he stammered. "Am I?" Michael asked, stepping closer, his thumb hovering over the button. "You crossed every line tonight. You used an innocent child and were willing to murder hundreds. There's no coming back from that. I am willing to die right now to make sure you never hurt anyone again." The standoff was absolute. The blinking red light cast a hellish glow on his face. He had become the soldier his grandfather had always been, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. The tension broke. Eleanor, watching with a horrified expression, finally woke from her trance. She looked at the monster her husband had become and made a choice. With a raw cry of despair, she lunged at Richard. The gun went off, the shot going wild. As Richard stumbled, Jacob, with a final, heroic effort, kicked his feet out from under him. Richard fell, his head hitting the corner of a stone pedestal with a sickening crack. He lay still, his eyes wide and vacant. It was over. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by Eleanor's ragged sobs as she crawled to her husband's body. David Chun and his men stormed into the room then, weapons drawn. "It's over, David," Michael said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's all over." The weeks that followed were a blur. The official story was a foiled terrorist plot, a necessary lie to protect the Thompson name. Richard was the mastermind, Eleanor, his manipulated victim. She was sent to a private psychiatric facility, a hollow shell of the sister Michael had loved. Jacob recovered, refusing any payment before disappearing back into the shadows. Michael was hailed as a hero, but he felt only emptiness. The betrayal had carved a deep wound in his soul. Months later, he was sitting in his office when his secretary announced a visitor. It was Emily, the maid's daughter, holding her mother's hand. She was no longer the terrified child from that night. Her eyes were bright, her smile shy, but genuine. She held out the worn teddy bear he'd had repaired for her. "Thank you for fixing my bear," she said, her voice a clear, sweet bell. Michael looked at this little girl, whose simple act of bravery, born from a child's pure sense of right and wrong, had saved his life. She had been the first domino, the small light that had exposed a great darkness. In that moment, he realized that while the world had Richards and Eleanors, it also had Emily's. The scar of his family's betrayal would never fully heal, But the courage of a 10-year-old girl had planted a new seed in its place, a seed of hope. He would rebuild, and he would never forget the little girl who had reminded him what it truly meant to be human. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comments section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.